Hello and welcome to the Louis Talks podcast. I am with you here today right in the middle of COVID-19, as you can probably tell by my extremely long beard and hair. I'm going to hide it behind the microphone because I haven't had either of them trimmed in about 8 weeks, and today I bought a beard straightening comb thinking that it would make the situation better, and in fact it's kind of made it slightly worse, slightly longer for sure. And I've gone from beard level hipster to beard level Merlin the Wizard. I won't have to market for clients soon. I'll just be able to conjure them with a staff. But on to the seriousness of the podcast. So I recorded this podcast a little while ago, as you can tell from the difference in length of beard and hair when you watch it. And I had a fantastic friend of mine, Tamzin Fox-Davies, on it for an interview. Now, Tamsin works with the Agile Business Consortium. And what the Agile Business Consortium actually does is talk about agility within business. But it's my frustration and Tamsin's great frustration that when most people think of agility, they think of digital marketing, maybe software, and then of course there's the classic getting staff to work from home one day a week and buying them chocolate on a Friday. Now, I'm not saying that those things aren't necessarily agile. They make up a part of being agile. But I think what agility truly is in business is far more than that. It comes from the very roots and foundations of the organisation, from an everyday level, all the way through, of course, to company culture, employee engagement and software and indeed marketing. So in this discussion, Tamsin and I dig deep into what agility is within business and companies and organisations, how people can make their organisations more agile, what that process looks like, because I think everyone's at different stages. We have a conversation about the difference in generations as well, because I feel in my work as a business developer that greatly changes from organisation to organisation, sometimes based on age and gender gaps within companies, cultures, things like that. They can all affect the way that a company or organisation is agile. So I was going to post this podcast a little bit later, decided not to, because I think with the situation that we're in at the moment with COVID-19, now more than ever, businesses, organisations, NGOs, everybody needs to be more agile. Now, given there are organisations and businesses out there, friends of mine who've got businesses in industries like the construction industry, where really there is very little that can be done now, apart from looking at brand and marketing and assessing where to go in the future. But I think for most of us, this is a really, really opportune moment to look at our businesses with a microscope in a way, to take a good hard look at what we're doing and really understand how we might be able to be more agile and therefore take not necessarily an opportunity of this time, but to look at our business models and figure out how we can improve and evolve into the future, because that's what it's really all about. So I really hope that you enjoy this conversation and interview with Tamsin, and I hope that you take something from it. I love to hear from people about the podcast, so if you do have any questions, please let me know, and in both of the descriptions there'll be links down below to connect with myself on social media or with Tamsin on LinkedIn. So, please enjoy this interview. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you are safe, happy and well through this COVID situation. And if there's absolutely anything that I can do, please don't hesitate to ask. Hi, Tamsin. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast this morning. Great to have you on. So let's just jump into things. Obviously, you are part of the Agile Business Consortium, and we've had a couple of conversations before, very in line with business agility. And obviously, we both work with lots and lots of different businesses of different sizes and different shapes. So tell me a little bit more about yourself. Tell the listeners about yourself and the Agile Business Consortium.
Sure. So thanks for having me on today. I'm really excited to be part of the podcast. So my background is in small businesses, entrepreneurship, and particularly on the marketing side and the kind of the customer engagement side of things. So I've worked with tech startups, and right through to running my own business as a marketing consultant as well. All of that has been really helpful in the work that I do with the Agile Business Consortium, because I didn't realize, but actually a lot of what I was doing anyway was taking quite an agile approach. And then through working with the consortium, I've learned more about what that means, how it works, and also what the benefits for organizations are. So for people that are listening that don't know, business agility is basically about making sure that businesses can be more flexible, more adaptable, because everything is changing so quickly now. And it's really, really hard for organizations to keep up, particularly as oftentimes their customers are ahead of them in terms of what their expectations are, versus what the business can deliver or feels like it needs to be delivering. We've got so many different influences in terms of, the kind of the macro political climate. People are becoming more attuned to different issues that they care more about, and businesses need to have an answer to those things. So what we do at the consortium is we help organizations and individuals to do that. We're a membership organization. We're a not-for-profit. This year we're in our 25th anniversary year, and we started off actually working with software developers, which is where Agile as a concept and a discipline comes from. So the idea was there that when people were working on software projects, often what happened was they ran a long project, they produced something, but by the end of it, it wasn't actually what people wanted. Maybe it overrun on time. Normally it overrun on budget. So when you take an agile approach, what you do is you break that down. So you get very clear on what your big picture is, but then you start small, you try something, and then you iterate and you build up in increments. And that can be applied to much more, obviously, than just software. These days, we're seeing things like agile marketing, agile HR, agile finance becoming bigger and bigger issues. So at the consortium, we do research, we produce case studies, we run events, we provide support to our members. We've got a lot of information that's available through our website for free at agilebusiness.org, and then our members obviously get some extra stuff on top of that, and we deliberately make our membership very affordable as well. So it's 50 quid a year for an individual plus VAT.
Amazing. Yeah, I think this is something that obviously I see an awful lot of as a consultant and working with lots of different companies as a marketeer as well. There's a real issue, particularly around marketing, sort of social media, tech. Everything moves so quickly. Like you said, I think it's more and more difficult now for businesses, particularly older businesses, to stay with the times. I think you see with a lot of new startups, they're already, I guess it's a generational thing as well. I was probably the last generation that wasn't born with a smartphone in its hand. But then obviously on from that, so many startup companies have got very young team members. And so they're kind of already agile in their makeup, but it's actually those businesses that have been around for a while that have got a bit of a mixed team in terms of age and generation. And so I guess where does an organisation, if an organisation feels like you said, they're a little bit maybe behind the times, or the customers are asking for things that they're not currently offering, what's the starting point for them to become more agile?
I think as a starting point, actually just recognizing that, like maybe, saying, oh, maybe we're not keeping up. Maybe we do need to try a bit harder and do a bit more. We see a lot of organizations who are in denial, that feel like they're just going to be able to carry on regardless. I can't remember where it came from, but I saw some statistics a little while ago that was basically saying that, something like 70% of our current banking institutions are going to be out of business within 15 years. Those numbers are not accurate, but you get the point. It's a lot of them, and they're going to be going out of business because they are these monolithic organizations who have been doing things the same way for a long time. So recognizing that issue at the start is important. Now, obviously, it's the whole turning the supertanker analogy, it is much harder to change a big business to become more agile than it is a small business. As you say, a lot of smaller businesses and startups, they will be happier to change things, but it's also a mindset as well. You have to be open to the opportunity. We run a big conference every year, the Agile Business Conference, which is just coming up in September. And one of our keynotes this year is actually the head of Agile and DevOps for Lloyds Banking Group, a guy called Michael Saunders. We think that that's the biggest Agile transformation in the world. They're putting about 3 billion into changing their whole business.
Wow.
So when you compare the likes of Lloyds to some of the challenger banks that are coming up, the online only new banks like Monzo that we're seeing, they're obviously looking at that and going, okay, they do business in a completely different way. What can we learn from that? How can we compete with them? And they're taking on the challenge, and that's really admirable. And we're seeing it in other industries as well. So yesterday I was talking to one of the agile leads from E.ON, from the energy company. Again, massive organization. And they've been working on their agile transformation, I think, since 2011. And they now have, I think it's only 12 agile coaches, but they've got thousands and thousands of employees all over the world. And what Dave, the guy there, was saying to me is that what they did was they looked for people who didn't necessarily have experience in agile, in inverted commas, in the sort of the technology change kind of way, but had that mindset about, oh, let's experiment, let's try things that can be different. Let's find people who want to work to help improve the organization, and they've upskilled them from within, and it's really, really exciting to see. So they now have a community, an internal community of about 400 people that are really into business agility and more agile ways of working, and together they're continuing to change the way that E.ON does business.
Amazing, yeah. I mean, you mentioned Monzo there. I've been a Monzo only user for a good few years now. I was sort of in that kind of early adoption cohort that came into Monzo, and because I was traveling a lot at the time, made a huge amount of sense for me to use it. But actually being back in the UK, I use it for everything. Like you said, I think it's really interesting to see something as ancient really as banking being changed. And when you listen to a lot of the guys and the team in Monzo talking about their business agility, it's layers and layers deep. I think that's the interesting thing. There's obviously this sort of front-facing brand, the coral card, which is very distinctive, and then all the way through the layers of the customer service. I've messaged customer service many times and had a response almost instantly through my phone. It's convenient. I can send pictures and videos or whatever I need to do. But I think then those other layers are the things that they're doing around mental health, around company culture,
Yeah.
And I think that's quite interesting, because I think that quite a few people see business agility as just, we need to rethink our customer journey. We need to maybe think our front end sales, or we need to do a bit of a rebrand, new logo, a little bit more colourful, slight change in the tone of voice. But actually, I think it's those deeper levels. And I was talking to a guy called Jonathan Winchester recently, who's part of a company called Insight 6. And he's done some really great talks that are available online. And he always says he's really, the Insight 6 are a company that deal with company culture and customer journey. And it starts with the people. And I think that's part of the challenge, isn't it, for these big companies, is recognizing not only that they need to change, but actually that there's a whole cultural shift that needs to come with that to empower the employees from the lower levels, so that then that permeates all the way through the company. So what's your perspective on that relationship of deep cultural change within companies?
Thank you for handing me that soapbox, because I have something to say. So let me tell you, the number of times that I go to an event to speak to a group of people, and somebody, and it's normally more than one person in the room, will say, oh yes, so we do agile working. And I get really excited, because I'm like, oh great, what does that mean? Do you have kind of regular team stand-ups? Do you come together as kind of cross-functional groups to work on problems, blah, 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 blah. No, they mean they're hot desking and they get to work from home 1 day a week, and they call that agile working. At which point I try to not visibly roll my eyes, because it's just a shame. It's just really sad. There's someone in that organization who thought it was a good idea to put that name on things and kind of try and make it a little bit better, sound a little bit better than really it is. Now, I'm all for getting people to work from home, and hot desking can work in the right environment, not knocking that, but that is not agile. And in fact, true business agility isn't about making your processes more agile. It's actually about making your strategy more agile as a whole organization. And I think that there's got to be very much a root and branch approach to that, because you need the organizational leadership to obviously understand that and to want to do it, but also you need the culture, which you say goes down to the lowest level of person in the organization, if it's one of those traditional, more sort of hierarchical organizations. Because some of the principles that we espouse for agile leadership and agile culture and just business agility, like good ideas can come from anywhere, is one of our fundamental principles that we talk about. Now, if you have an organization where like the cleaner is afraid to speak up, but they've got a really, really good idea, then that's not going to help. And that's part of leadership, and it's about part of culture as a whole. And in fact, there was a really good example. I think it's the company. It's the people that do Cheetos. There is a super hot version of Cheetos, and that came about because one of the guys who was a janitor in the organization said, look, there is nothing here that actually appeals to the Latinx kind of market who like things a bit spicier. We're missing a huge amount of market share. And he sat at home, came up with some ideas, came up with some spices, and talked to the CEO and the leadership team about it. I think he's now one of their senior product leads in the organization. It was a video I saw the other day. But this is a perfect example. Another agile principle is that the people who are closest to the problem are best able to help solve it. The further away you are, which typically means further up the hierarchy, actually the less idea you have about the practical solutions. So we have a couple of free resources that people are very, very welcome to go and have a look at. They're all on our website. So we have a set of principles for agile leadership and a set of principles for agile culture. And the thing that we've got to go along with the agile culture piece as well is what we call the agile culture DNA matrix. And it's a really simple table. And for each of the pillars of agile culture, it helps you figure out whereabouts you are, how agile you actually are as an organization, and where do you want to be. There's a lot of people who will automatically say, oh, well, we want to be the most agile. But actually, that might not be appropriate or where they really need to be. It could be that actually they want to be scoring much higher for, say, innovation than they do for one of the other areas of culture. And you can figure that out, and you can use it as a discussion tool and to actually ask people. It's like, okay, if we want to believe that good ideas could come from anywhere, and we want people in our organization to feel that, let's ask them, do they feel comfortable speaking up? Let's find out. Let's try an experiment where that makes things possible and see who actually steps forward to take part. So yeah, rant over.
No, it's really good to hear, because I think that is one of the great misconceptions I see with a lot of companies. I go in, they want to make changes, they have that initial understanding of maybe things aren't quite right, or company culture isn't quite where it should be, but they then put all of their focus into the sales and marketing side, and that's fine. But when you've got team members in the company that are decentivized or not feeling engaged with the business, then it doesn't matter how good your front-end marketing is and your funnels. If a guy picks up the phone who's miserable and doesn't like his job, you've got a problem. And I think that, as you said, what an incredible example of a company, obviously Cheetos, whoever the sort of manufacturing body is, or whoever makes them, but what an incredible thing that, to not only take an idea on board, but actually make it happen and then promote the guy through the ranks of the business. So yeah, I think it's incredible when an organization understands how to do that all the way through the business. And like I was saying, is that when a company doesn't really understand that at root cause, the people that are closest to the problem know the solution. And I think that sometimes it's almost a bit of an ego problem, I think, with a lot of businesses, you know, that there's this not wanting to put power in their eyes or put too much responsibility for the overall business direction in the hands of staff members who are perhaps not in upper management. And so I that's a real challenge. And how do you see that? And I get that certain organisations are just never going to get it, because if they don't understand it and they're not willing to make that change. But if somebody is struggling a little bit, what would be your advice in understanding how to get over some of those, you know, sort of battles within company politics, let's say?
I think it's about redefining who you are as a leader, and also who you want your leaders in your organization to be, if you're at that senior level where you can help to direct that. In Agile and Business Agility, people talk a lot about servant leadership, and that's really at the crux of it. So the idea that a leader is there to serve the organization and the people that work with them. And it's not about, you know, being a glorified PA. It's about actually coaching and facilitating those people to get done what they need to do. It's about getting obstacles out of their way. It's got an awful lot to do with trust. So I think a lot of teams who are transitioning, and bigger organizations as well, who are transitioning to want to be more genuinely agile in terms of their culture, they probably need to go down a road of doing some work on internal trust, because typically many organizations that just doesn't exist. We as an organization have been through our own transformation as we've grown. I mean, we used to be, when we first started, it was entirely a volunteer-led organization, and we have 12 people in the team now. And as we've been through a restructure, and you know, making transitions into different roles, where we've become much more of a kind of a flat structure as well, even with only 12 people. Like, we've been working on that. We've had a coach that we've had the ability to work with one-to-one. We've also been doing group work on team communication, on strategy development. You know, big decisions we often workshop together, although obviously John, our CEO, will sort of give us the pointers. He very much comes to us as well and says, okay, this is what we want to be doing. A, have I missed anything? And B, like, what's the best way to approach that? Because he needs us to implement it. So it's a good idea to kind of ask, like, how do you want to make that work? And I think there are some people that will probably always struggle in an agile culture because they basically just want to be told what to do. But typically, you know, I think there's always going to be jobs for them, just maybe not in those organizations that really do become fundamentally much more agile, or maybe it's a completely different role that they need.
Yeah, definitely. And I think and that sounds incredible. You know, it's great to have a position where the CEO is actually asking, you know, the team and saying, well, actually, what do we all think? Because I think it's, you know, I a long time ago used to work with quite a few ex-military personnel who were going into business. And although there was this idea of respect that was passed down from sort of rank to rank, ultimately there was an understanding of a team. Because when your life is on the line, if the team doesn't function well enough,
Yes,
somebody's going to get hurt. And so I think it was quite interesting to have that perspective that actually a lot of businesses don't have that. There's almost this, you know, I see a lot of businesses almost like the Viking ship, where there's the chief Viking on the front of the boat and they're sort of, you know, whipping the rowers in you know, sort of into action. And it's just this is how it is, this is what you do, that's the process. And I think that I've worked with a number of organisations recently where the CEO is just and not really a fault of their own in a sense, but they're just a little bit more detached from the business. And so because of that, a lot of the staff and team members are offering up really good solutions and saying, well, we're the guys that are doing it. We understand that there's a problem here. Why can't we have that solved? And so I think that's a real challenge, is that when you've got companies that are perhaps a little bit bigger and they've got that middle management, but if you haven't got that and it is almost, CEO or business owner or MD and then the team members, that sometimes I find is even a little bit more of a challenge, because they've just been very used to, as a business owner or MD, just pushing their agenda, and everyone should just accept it. So I think, how would you start to deal with that as a slightly different dynamic?
Yeah, it is a different dynamic. I mean, I think that's classic founder syndrome, isn't it? That's the problem. And I mean, what you see happening quite frequently is that the founder actually either leaves the business or becomes, takes on more of a kind of a chairman type role, rather than the kind of MD role. I've seen some organizations work quite effectively where they've brought someone else in to kind of balance them. So they've brought in, an operations lead who's the person that makes everything run, so the founder can keep doing the kind of like wacky ideas type stuff, and also using their their kind of cachet as the founder of that organization to build partnerships and all of that kind of thing. But I think it's hard, and I think it's a personal challenge for founders and business owners, because oftentimes they don't recognize it. I think, sometimes if they're lucky, they might end up starting to work with, say, a business coach who can actually tap them on the shoulder and say, look, you've done great so far. You're not the person to be in this position to take your business to the next stage. And that's hard to let go of.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And having built my own businesses, it's your baby. It's you've grown this thing from the start. And I think that it is quite interesting that a lot of friends in the investment world, most founders end up being pushed out because, like you said, unfortunately, they're a little bit too emotionally attached to the business. They're a little bit too difficult to work around, and they have very specific ideas about how to grow the business. And it's not to say that those ideas and concepts are bad. It's just that sometimes you need more of a team to manage that process, like you said. And I think that it's really nice to see that there are the organisations out there like the Monzos of the world and many, many others that are becoming a lot more agile and putting staff first and putting company health and company culture and health and wellness and all of these things. They're really putting them into the fabric of the organisation. But I think the challenge is, for a lot of business owners, is return on investment. That's the classic one you hear is, well, what's the return on investment of company culture? I'm going to take my staff out for a big lunch after we've won a contract, or, small little things, buying them gifts, when they've done something really good, or they're really small things. But again, most businesses and owners will say, well, what's the return on investment? And it's a challenging thing to say, because of course it is a longer term thing. And when you look at companies like Mind Valley and Vision, and you look at Sir Richard Branson, obviously a great example, and when you read a lot of his books and materials, he's been doing it for years, putting company culture at the forefront of his business. I mean, there was a case that when Virgin Airlines first started up, and he was attacked by British Airways in very clever ways, but they were basically doing a bit of a smear campaign, and it all came to a head where he ended up suing BA for a huge amount of money. And I think still it's the largest anyone has ever won from BA. And he gave it all to his staff, divided it all between the staff members. And I think that, I don't know, is that question of return on investment, I just see it as, when you look at these businesses that are super successful, surely isn't that telling you that there is return on investment here? that, if you look at a lot of Sir Richard Branson businesses, or Mind Valley, or Gymshark, which is a really good example of a business that's just down the road from where I am. The average age in the business is 22 or 23, and they're doing 185 million turnover. But they've got such an incredible company culture. So what do you say to that question of what's going to be my return on investment if I become more agile?
I think there's a couple of different things there. I mean, I think first of all, there's addressing the issue of what people think a positive company culture is. A positive company culture does not mean that you have a foosball table and drinks every Friday. That might be part of what you do, but that doesn't make a positive company culture. And I've seen organizations in the past where, they put those things in place as an excuse to really drive people very, very hard the rest of the time. And that's not what it's about. I mean, I think definitely if you look at so agile culture, like I said, that's much more about innovation, having people understand that they can work in small sprints, having people understand that they can make mistakes as well. Those kind of things. I think that's much more at the heart of what it is. And rewards and appreciation are important. I think they matter. I think the return on investment question for those kind of things is almost negligible because they cost so little in the grand scheme of things. So, for example, one of the benefits that we get here is health insurance. Now, if we have access to improved healthcare and people that we know that we can go to and we can get treatment quicker because, as we all know, our NHS is completely overstretched, then that's good for the business because there's more there's more in work time for people rather than out of work time. Like those kind of things are super simple. In terms of agility, a lot of people talk about it as being, kind of better, faster, cheaper. That's not always the case. Normally faster, yes. And that's normally in time, in terms of time to first value that's received rather than necessarily finishing the whole project, whatever it is. But you get returns quicker. Cheaper, not necessarily, but you do tend to get better quality. And so therefore, over time, the value of those outputs is better. And better, generally speaking, that's definitely an outcome, I think, for taking a more agile approach if you do it properly and if you actually see it through. There's a Dilbert cartoon that I saw a little while ago because everything can be reduced to a Dilbert cartoon in business, right? That's just the way it is. And it was about the boss was saying that he wanted the organization to be more agile, but only in this small box over here. Like, that's not really how it works. Yes, you can demonstrate some of the benefits of agility, but you need to actually take it through your whole organization. But there's a whole load of different metrics that you can look at. And I think one of the clearest ones is probably staff retention. Better staff retention means that you're spending less on recruitment, you're spending less on redundancy payments, and those kind of things. And it also means that you tend to have people who are more engaged and more productive. And we know that people need purpose in their lives and in their work. That's what makes people the most happy. Good salary and good benefits are helpful, but actually that feeling of purpose and that feeling of being able to contribute and add value is what people most cherish. And a more agile business that has a more agile culture does that for people because they feel like they are part of the solution, they're part of the contribution.
Yeah, and I think picking up on that point of staff retention, something I see a lot recently is a really interesting metric is how many younger people are they holding on to, because I think that the younger generation, because they're more plugged into social media, they're on LinkedIn, they're looking at content, they're watching, Gymshark's content on company culture, they're plugged into all of this stuff. So actually it's really interesting, for businesses to ask themselves, am I keeping my younger staff? Because I think that's a really good, almost metric indicator of how good actually are you at your company culture and how agile are you? Because if you're able to keep 22-year-olds who, there's a learning curve, and don't get me wrong, I think I was sort of quite lucky to be from a slightly older generation where I was, through my own business, taught a lot of patience, and
Hmm.
sometimes I don't want to be one of those millennial bashers, because I'm not, but there is a sense of patience that needs to be learnt. But at the same time, they are pushing and saying, well, where is the company culture? What's happening? What about a mental health counsellor? What about support because I've got anxiety? What about these things that I'm seeing other businesses out there doing? Why aren't we doing it? And so I think that's a really interesting one.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think you know the millennials and Generation Z are often criticised for being less loyal. I don't think that that's true. I think they are loyal, but they're loyal when it's deserved. And just because you're more mobile doesn't mean you're less loyal, if you see what I mean. Because I think a lot of people in previous generations would stay in one job basically out of fear. And because what the common perception was that you need to kind of serve your time, almost like it's that sort of old school apprenticeship mentality. What I think younger employees are looking at now is A, do I like my work? B, am I learning? Like they want to be learning all the time, and as an employer, you want them to be learning all the time because then they're going to be more valuable to you as well. And again, am I able to contribute? And then I think you've actually got those extra things, those peripheral kind of support setups and perks that make your job easier to do. Um, but I don't think in the same way that most people don't tend to leave a job because of their salary, I don't think they necessarily leave because there isn't in-house counselling. What they might leave for is if, say they've got an anxiety problem, and I've worked with people previously who've got very severe anxiety. It's not necessarily whether that's in-house, but it's whether they have people that they work with that understand and give them the space to get the support that they need, and they're okay with the fact that, do you know what, they are still equal and they can contribute in a really, really valuable way. And that's just another issue that gets dealt with. Everybody's got some kind of weird issue. Everybody's got one, and it's just a case of making accommodations for those, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that whole mental health piece is just becoming so critical in business, and it's so great to see that actually more business leaders are talking about it in a serious way. Obviously, keep referring back to Monzo, but I know that they've got an incredible support network, for mental health within the Monzo as an organisation. And they've got internal support groups, they've got counselling groups, because they really understand that, like you said, in modern society, we're actually realising that we've all got probably some issues locked, deep down inside, and actually they do affect us, and that understanding of where those issues come from and how they affect us in our relationships personally and in our careers and our businesses. And like you said, it's just having that understanding. And I think that there's a great guy called Joe Glover who runs the marketing meetup, and he does some really great content on LinkedIn. And he did a post a few weeks ago, and this might sound a little bit cheesy for most, but he said there's a real issue that we've got, is that we don't talk about love enough in business. And it's
Hmm.
not in the sort of, kind of fluffy sense or romantic love, but just, the appreciation for other people and compassion and understanding and empathy that actually, we've all got things going on in our lives. We've all got, issues, or it could be, family problems, and it's that understanding that, of course, it's going to affect us in our professional lives. Of course, it's going to affect us at work. And like you said, it's having that support and understanding, whether it's either at work or away from work, but that understanding of time and this idea of health and wellness becoming a lot more holistic. Deloitte and many other organisations for many years have had wellness specialists within the organisations looking at both physical health but also mental health. I mean, you
Hmm.
mentioned earlier, obviously, about the private medical insurance. I mean, it's such a massive thing because, like you said, the NHS is incredibly stretched, and sometimes when you do need something quick to happen, it's having that support there, and what a great incentive to feel as a part of an organisation, that actually you don't necessarily have to worry about that. That if there is some kind of health issue, or you just need to go and see somebody to get something checked out, that it's an easier process.
Yeah, yeah, it makes a huge difference. I mean, my uh, speaking from personal experience, I had breast cancer about 10 years ago, and the treatment that I was able to access compared to some of my friends who've been through something similar, because I was able to go privately, particularly through the diagnosis part, was incredible. Because I think what people don't appreciate until they go through it is, if you have a potential diagnosis hanging over you, there's something that's going on and you don't know what it is, and you're going through tests and you have weeks and weeks and weeks of waiting. That is the worst part, and it ruins your life, at that time, because there is no escape from it. Once you know what the issue is, it's much easier to deal with it. But when you have no idea, it's very, very hard, and it makes such a difference. And just that, because there's that thing as well, where if you're in that kind of mental state, it's very, very difficult for you to work. But oftentimes people actually want to be at work, because it's that giving them purpose, it's getting them out of the house, it's having people treat them normally. And that's a really hard balance to get right. And yeah, and I really appreciate and respect any organization where they deal with that in a good and sensitive way, which should be all of them. Unfortunately, it's not. But kudos to the people that do that well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you said, it's such an important thing for serious diagnosis and care, but also on a lower level, just access to more information around health and wellness, whether it be
Yes.
mental, whether it be physical. It's such an important thing, and I think even to the extent, slightly off topic, but educational disabilities, as they were once known,
Hmm.
understanding of differences in employees and the nature of how our brains work. And it's sort of around about 50% of the UK population is dyslexic.
Hmm.
And obviously with that you get what's now known as neurological diversity, as this sort of umbrella term,
Yeah.
and that then creates all of its own interesting and unusual challenges within the way people learn.
Hmm.
Autism affects mental health. There's all sorts of things that I think, as a deeper level, the more organisations understand how to look after their staff from a mental and physical point of view, obviously you're going to see returns. And I always say to people with health and wellness, I got pretty unhealthy and ill a number of years ago myself, was pre-diabetic and got diagnosed with onset rheumatoid arthritis. And I was quite lucky that I'd studied a lot of health and wellness and biochem and various other things, and I was sort of able to help that and alleviate those symptoms incredibly quickly compared to
Hmm.
most. But that was me. I was very lucky to do that. Most people don't have access to that
Yeah.
information. They don't have access to treatments or different options sometimes of looking at things. And like you said, the diagnosis, because the NHS is notoriously bad at diagnosing because of how stretched and strained the system
Yeah.
is. And and it's not necessarily negligence, but you're dealing with a whole cohort of doctors and nurses who are, most of them, sleep deprived. Most of them are not looked after themselves.
Hmm.
Most of them are struggling, and so it's human error. And things like that happen when you're in situations like that. So I think that in the same way in our companies, you see a lot of the time that actually, I was working with a company in sort of early part of this year, and so many of the staff were off sick
Hmm.
constantly, because offices are a breeding ground for bugs and colds and
Yeah.
flus and stuff. And actually that's another thing that is, if we're all a little bit healthier and we all have access to that, actually it can help the company, because then they haven't got 6 or 7 team members at the same time off sick. So it's a really interesting one, and it's deep within some organisations, but like you said, most don't ever consider that as part of really company culture or looking after staff. It's an interesting one.
Absolutely, and I think the topic, particularly of neurodiversity, is a very important one because oftentimes organisations and individuals see it as being a hindrance, but actually there's a lot of advantages there too. So a friend of mine is a guy called Peter Shankman, who's based in the US, and he has a brilliant podcast about his life as an entrepreneur with ADHD called Faster Than Normal. And he fundamentally says if he didn't have ADHD, he would not have been able to achieve all the things that he's done in his life at the rate that he's done them. And he interviews other people with different varieties of the condition as well, who are oftentimes like people you'd have no clue, but they're they're very influential kind of thought leaders, highly productive entrepreneurs, all of these kinds of people. And part of what he talks about as well is how you manage that to an advantage. So in agility, we talk a lot about diversity and cross-functional teams. And actually, that's not just about having people from different roles in an organization. It's about having people who think in different ways. And, like autistic conditions often come with a very high degree of creativity in a really, really, really specific way. And if you can understand that in your team members, if they're really good at a very particular type of problem solving, then knowing that and being able to go, Sarah, help me out with this, because I know that this is how your brain works and you're really, really good at this, then, you can save yourself just so much time and anguish and come to a really solid result a lot quicker. And I don't think we look at that closely enough.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I did some work with Ernst Young, got to be 5 or 6 years ago, I think now, and they actually were saying within their organisation that they found that there was this almost like golden ratio of about 30+% people within that team that should be neurodiverse, because actually it was the creativity, the problem solving, the big ideas, the big concepts, but you then needed other team members to follow up on the detail.
Yeah.
Or the opposite in when you look at I'm autistic myself, but when you look at the autistic side on hyper detail focus, like you said, developers, programmers, an awful lot of very highly skilled mathematical and detailed orientated people are also autistic. So it's understanding that balance of if you understand that within a team and how it affects the team as a whole, it as you said, it can be a great asset. And it is interesting that so many big successful entrepreneurs that we've all heard of are neurodiverse. Obviously Sir Richard Branson, Theo Pathetis, that the list goes on and on. Bill Gates,
Seth Godin, loads of them.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that this is another aspect, like you said, of, again, understanding your people deeper. And a lot of the time, particularly with older generations, because I think the younger generation probably passed me, really, because we when I was diagnosed at 11, we still had to pay for it privately. But I think now, as the kids coming through probably 5 or 6 years after me leaving school, a lot of them were picked up at that point. So I think, a good amount, especially in the UK, are now recognised as having, dyslexia or dyspraxia or whatever it might be. But actually for the older generation, my mom didn't find out she was dyslexic until I was 11 when she was diagnosed, because the guy who was diagnosed sat down with her for 5 minutes, asked her, a few questions and said, yep, you're dyslexic as well. And so I think sometimes actually it's the older generations that perhaps have absolutely never had a clue that they are potentially on the autistic spectrum or are neurologically diverse, but because they've never been given the support or understanding, they've gone through their whole lives thinking that they're just bad at certain things in life, or worse, stupid. That was my mom's opinion. She always used to say to me, I just thought I was thick, thought I was really stupid at school, and of course it's not. It's just that they learn in a different way. And from an educational side of things, it's been shown that all students, all kids actually learn better when taught in a way that supports neurological diversity. So it's actually taking that across into companies and saying, well, how do we make sure that when we're communicating internally, how do we make sure that that is across all levels and applies to all people and all different types of learning capabilities?
I think that's so important. There's some interesting work that we're doing at the moment. So we have a campaign that I'm running, which is it's called Generation Agile. So the basis of the campaign is that education across the board needs to give more support and more weight to actually teaching agile skills. So things like complex problem solving, creativity, team working. There's some really fundamental ones. The World Economic Forum produced a report earlier this year, and it was looking at the skills, the top 10 skills that were looked for by employers in 2018, and then projecting forward to 2023, so 5 years out. And it's much more on that agile skill side, particularly as technology picks up. So even things that are really looked for now in terms of data analysis, for example, that's going to be majority run by computers. Like, you're just not going to need to have that personal level of skill anymore. But what's happening at the moment is that our educational systems around the world, it's not just a UK thing, aren't really set up to deliver those things. So what I've been doing is talking to different organizations that are actually trying to change that. And most of the time, they're not using terms like agile. They're not talking about that. And it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. But what does matter is the fact that kids and young people are being given those skills. They're being helped to develop them so that they can actually fulfill the jobs of the future that are going to be required, but also so that the organizations who want to be more agile actually have the people in the organizations with the skill sets that are able to do it. So one case study that we've just recently released, and this is on our website as well, is based on Islington primary schools and some of the work that they do with the STEM ambassadors program. So STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. I can remember the acronym. What they do is they have a group of ambassadors who are all volunteers, who are people who work in those fields in one way or another, and they will often go and speak to students, talk to them about their careers, all of that kind of thing. The case study that we've developed is one with an organisation that specifically runs hackathons with primary school kids. So they're teaching them a way of approaching problems and teaching them a skill that a lot of people don't learn until much later in life, either if they decide that they're going to become a programmer or run a startup or something like that. And it's really, really exciting. It's really interesting how the kids get really involved. It actually makes the teachers more engaged taking part in the STEM Ambassadors program, because they feel like there's actually more purpose to what they do, and they're starting to see more of a resonance with the kids because they're interested in the subjects. But that whole kind of project-based learning and problem-based learning is really, really vital, and it much more supports, as you say, neurodiverse student populations, but it actually makes it more interesting for those people who aren't. I mean, the things that I remember from school, because I was quite kind of traditionally academic, and therefore, in terms of learning, I had quite an easy ride, particularly through my primary school and early secondary school years. But I would have just enjoyed it so much more if it had been more engaging, more fun, more project-based, rather than here's a book, memorize this bit, and then regurgitate it.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's some of the problem that employers find, I think, with the skills gap, that there still is such a skills gap where, even seeing it from a marketing perspective, I was working with a company again earlier this year. They had some basically, marketing graduates coming in who still had no idea about social media. They had no idea about CRM systems. There were some real basic things that they just hadn't been covered, and it was amazing, because you think, this is today's age where marketing is all digital. So actually, okay, it's important to learn foundational approaches to marketing, but ultimately what is probably most important is landing pages and digital marketing and SEO and social media. And so I think, that there is a skills gap in terms of soft and hard skills. That, like you said, the problem is we have no idea what the world's going to look like in 5 years, but we can at least try and get to a point where I think it's a bit like an analogy I always say, where when most people are taught how to cook, they're taught with recipes, and the problem with a recipe is that it's just one formula. So if you teach somebody how to make tomato soup and you give them a recipe, they can only ever make tomato soup. But when you teach them the methodology of soup in general, they can make soup with anything. And so it's that problematic thinking where it's looking at something and figuring out, well, okay, if today I'm a coder, but if tomorrow coding ends, because I mean we're seeing it now in the world of marketing, the landing page builders and the website builders, almost anybody can build a website now, almost anybody can build web tile apps. You know, these things are actually getting easier and more simple. So as you said, well, what's the next set of problems that we need to solve over the next 20 years? And it's all of that side of things, that if you're teaching people the methodology rather than a specific set of principles or a set recipe of doing something in a certain way. So it's great to hear that you're doing work with schools, because I think, you know, this is where a lot more focus needs to go, and also within an organisation. One of the biggest problems that I see is, especially companies that are quite heavily multi-generational, there is a bit of a discourse between the older generation and the younger, because obviously they grew up in different worlds. You know, the kids today grew up with phones in their hands. So for them, social media is just an extension of their everyday life. For a member of a team in a marketing agency who's in their 50s, you know, they sort of know that this stuff is out there, but because they weren't brought up on it. So I guess that's that challenge of how do you get that intergenerational play happening and understanding and learning from each other, but how a company actually understands how to take in millennials and you know, give them all the means that they need to flourish within an organisation.
I think that's true, and I tend to think that marketing is a particularly good discipline actually for having that awareness, because all of us, definitely me, we get to a point where there will be a new platform or a new kind of technique that comes along and we just don't get it. Me, Snapchat and Twitch, that's not my bag. Like, I know they exist. I do not get it. TikTok, I kind of understand, but it's just still, it's like, that's me. So I'm like, okay. That's a little reality check there. I'm officially old in marketing terms.
Yeah, it's true, and you know, I think that's the challenge. But for a company, it's actually seeing that as an advantage. Where I'm not on TikTok. You know, I like you said, I kind of understand it, and I think that if I potentially work with the right company of the right demographic audience, then I know that it would be a good thing to do, but it still doesn't mean that I would feel confident in creating a marketing campaign on the platform, because I'm not on it. And so I can't understand what is or is not going to work for that generation. So I think that's where it is important to say, okay, there is a line to be drawn that actually if you're going to run a TikTok campaign, it's probably a 20 to 22-year-old that needs to do that, who uses it in their own time but can apply a marketing strategy to it. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think also with that as well, something that I've seen as a marketing kind of, it's not a trend, it's just the kind of the framework of where we are, is that there is so much more breadth now. So for example, like looking at YouTube's been around for donkey's years now. I mean, you know, in marketing years, a really long time, in internet years. But the way that different people use it and different industries use it is really changing. So you might know about, I don't know, like makeup influencers, for example. That's a very, very different approach to, say, like the gaming industry, which is massive in terms of, for those people that don't know, just in terms of like the money that can be made by individuals recording themselves playing games and talking about it. Like, it sounds ridiculous. Actually, it's really engaging. especially if that is a game that you're into yourself. And it's absolutely enormous now. But the people who, you might get someone who understands both, even though they're a very, very different thing. Those people probably aren't necessarily the same people that would be great at running like a really solid Snapchat campaign. It's just so different.
Yeah, so I think jumping back to that, because I think it is interesting how much the world is changing. The game example, a friend of mine, their stepbrother, it basically at one point was making sort of 20 or 30 grand a month in recording themselves playing games.
Yeah.
And, this is it. It's little signs like that times are changing. They're changing fast. And so I guess as the consortium, how do you manage this breadth? Because, agility is so broad. It's so wide. It's company culture, and it's health, and it's mental health, and it's marketing and branding, and so there's so many aspects to it. How do you actually manage that? And, as a team yourselves, make sure that you're on the front foot to help organisations through this process. And I guess you've got to be really balanced, because you've got to understand them where they are, but also understand where the market is going as well.
I think partly it's recognizing that nobody can. So we see ourselves as a as a gathering point. So we do not have all the expertise in-house. We have always taken a very collegiate kind of approach in terms of developing tools and methodologies, and also the qualifications. So we have created the materials and the methodologies and things that are used for a lot of different qualifications now, and then we have them accredited externally, and it's different trainers that run them. So we're not running training ourselves, but we have always brought in people who are doing those things from different disciplines, from different areas, to actually help create that content. I think it's healthy to recognize that no one person can be on top of everything. So, for example, like looking at Agile HR, there's some really, really strong people who are leading in those areas. Pia Maria Thoren is one, and Natal Dank is another, who are creating and developing Agile HR as a discipline. And we look to them for, okay, what's the latest thing in that area? We don't have to create it all here. And I think that that's actually a big problem for a lot of enterprise organizations as well. The kind of the not invented here syndrome is poisonous. Take the knowledge from wherever it exists, because those people know, like, it's too hard now, because things change so fast. You can't always upskill yourself or your own team to do everything. This is why there are more and more specialists and kind of consultants and project-based workers who are brought in to help solve specific issues or bring knowledge or experience in specific ways, and who then move on again, and that's fine. It's okay. I think recognizing your shortcomings and where your gaps are has to be a starting point. We also work with several different universities. We fund the Agile Research Network, and then we work with other universities outside of the network as well. And we're drawing on the studies and the expertise that they have, and looking at what they're doing in terms of working with the next wave of entrepreneurs and the next wave of agile businesses that are appearing in the world.
Brilliant, yeah. And so if an organisation, business, company, startup, whoever it is, wants to become more agile, mm-hmm. is that something that is purely online resource? Is it about coming to events? Is it about working with a coach? And I know there's lots and lots of different levels, but
yeah.
How easy is it to start that process?
I think it's very easy to start, and then where you want to go after that depends on the type of that will then influence the type of help that you look for. So, for example, I mean, there's a lot of great free information available on our website. Go and have a look, pick up some of the resources, watch some of the videos, use some of the case studies, just to get a handle on, okay, what does this mean? Don't fall into the understanding that you want to be more agile and then saying, right, we're going to do remote working. Like, that's not what it's about. It's much more about understanding the basics of incremental and iterative working, and doing things like, simple things like just enough planning up front, different ways to prioritize, all of that kind of stuff. We have all of that available online. What you might find that you want to do is bring in someone that's worked in an Agile team before. That can be very, very helpful, whether that's as a consultant or a core team member, because they can, on a day-to-day basis, actually say, if we do things this way, that could be a lot more helpful. I think it's important that people look at their culture. I thoroughly recommend having a look at the matrix that we created, because that's free, again, and the principles of Agile culture, and saying, actually, could we be a little bit more like this? And there's a common term in Agile, which is about the fact that Agile is a journey rather than a destination. Agilists tend not to talk about best practice, because that implies that you can get to a level of achievement and then you just sit there. And that's not what it's about. It's always about developing further, and it's an ongoing process. There are also really good and accessible qualifications that are available. So the ones that we've created, that, as I say, are delivered by other people, Agile PM, which is the world's most popular Agile project management qualification. There are people who offer that online. There are people who offer it in person. And although it's designed for project management, it's got those principles in that you can apply to just about everything. But yeah, there's a lot of information out there, and we're more than happy for people to come along and use all of our free stuff. It can be very valuable to attend either a local meetup or some organized events as well. So whether that's something like the Agile Business Conference that we run, or, like a local Agile meetup, and just find out what other people are doing, listen to some case studies, see how things have happened in other organizations, what their successes were and what their pitfalls were. And then, think about, okay, well, how would that work for me? And the benefit of a live event is that you can normally go up and ask them afterwards as well, which is really handy.
Yeah, brilliant. That's great. And what are some of your favourite business transformation stories that you've seen? Because I think it's, we talked about a few, but it'd be really nice for some of the listeners to hear maybe some particular examples of businesses that really have become agile and changed culture, and it's made an impact in different ways.
Yeah, I think there's some really good different examples, because also, so it happens in different ways. So there's those organizations where they have they've taken an old company and then morphed into something new. Or there's people who've looked at like an industry model and then completely changed that industry and developed as time has gone on. So an example of the latter is someone like Netflix. Like, they reinvented how video rental was done. But then what they've done now is they're continuing to reinvent themselves by creating their own programming as well, and then also hooking up with other platforms. So, for example, like, I have Netflix at home, but I access it through my Amazon Prime. Now, you might think of those as being competitive services, but I'm very happy to have both of them, and I use both of them extensively. And so it's changing that whole business model from being Blockbuster versus another video rental store to being something completely different. I think Spotify is often held up as being like the kind of the ultimate agile model, and people talk about structuring their business in a similar way to the way that Spotify does theirs. Spotify themselves say that only works if you are a very, very, very similar organization to them, i.e. you do music streaming and you're based in Sweden, right? So they talk about that in the same way. So Spotify, again, following on from the kind of the Napsters, they looked at that model, changed the way it was done, but now they're evolving too. So the fact that podcasts and things are available through Spotify, they've changed the way that they run their advertising and their subscription program and all of those kind of things as well. So I think there's lots of different examples. And what I would encourage people to do is kind of seek out like what happens in their industry. So if they just Google like business agility or agile and then their industry, and see what comes up, because there is a perception that it's all about tech. It's all about software. There's a great organization whose name I cannot remember because it's just gone from my mind. But they are a tomato canning plant. tomato plant canning company based in North America. I think they produce something like 40% of all of North America's canned tomatoes, or something ridiculous. It's an awful lot. But so they have a very traditional type of product manufacturing process. There's only so many ways you can get a tomato, squish it, and stick it in a can, right? However, they became an agile business, but they did it through that cultural approach. They did it through making it possible for any member of the organization to actually make change within the business. So it was a combination of leadership, because they empowered the people, and the culture as well. So there's loads and loads of different examples out there. It's actually really hard just to pick a couple. And what I'm loving to see right now is also where people are taking learning from an organization that they've worked in, that did work in an agile way, and then applying it in another organization, or creating their own business. So I know we've mentioned Monzo a couple of times. A friend of mine, Bailey Cursor, used to work with Monzo. She's now set up an organization called Toucan. They're a finance app that is specifically designed to support balanced mental health around finance, because people suffering from mental health difficulties, oftentimes it's their finances that are kind of the thing that they lose track of at the first hurdle, and then they can end up in a really bad position, and then that just makes their mental health issues worse. And it's such a wonderful, needed thing. So she's obviously learnt about finance and how to do it in a banking in a different way, and has taken that learning and then applied it to something that really matters to her. And I'm really excited to see where they go as an organisation.
Amazing. And sort of finally, if an organisation wants to become more agile, I hate to put a number on it, but if you had 3 or 5 or 10 top sort of tips to get started, what would be, some, and it could be a software tool, or it could be a process, or it could be something to do, it could be a workshop. What would you suggest an organisation start doing?
Right. So I would say have a look at our principles of agile leadership to start with. I think there's 8 of them. If you want to make your organization more agile, I think the most effective way to do that is top down, because then you've got the advantage that people lower down are more empowered to do it. So you have to take that leadership approach first. I would also suggest that that an organization next talks to its people, explains what it's trying to do, and actually says, look, we want you to be part of this process. We want you to contribute in a different way that actually allows you to do more with the abilities that you have, and to be valued in a better way for it. And I think that, especially if you're talking about a larger organization, that's your kind of like your top and your bottom. I think then what you have to do is make sure that the people in the middle are appropriately skilled to make that happen. Because as we know, when under pressure or under stress, everybody kind of reverts back to their kind of their baseline way of operation. And middle managers, thereby feeling that their roles might be threatened because they're being asked to facilitate something that's completely different, could revert much more to that command and control and micromanaging. And I think it's helping those people to become more of the coaching and the servant leaders. And I think that could be as simple as reskilling and retraining. It could be as simple as bringing in 1 or 2 or more agile coaches to actually help with that process. Those external eyes can be really, really valuable. But for an individual, you can become more agile in your way of working, whatever you do, wherever you are. It's a case of understanding the iterative and the incremental approach. So doing small things, testing, and then building on with the next thing, proving the value of that. And even if you only use it to manage your own workload, it just tends to make your life a lot easier and more joyful as part of it. And one of my favorite tools for doing that is Trello. It's free as a personal account. It's really, really easy to use. It's very easy to show to people, to explain what you're up to and why, and build that transparency. And it's a really, really useful tool. And if you would like to have, a kind of a drip feed of more of that stuff, more of those resources available to you, including all sorts of templates and that kind of thing, then I heartily recommend membership of the consortium. It's 50 quid a year. It's really valuable.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Tamzin. Where can people find, obviously I'll put all of the information in the show notes, but where can people find you and the Agile Consortium?
So we're at agilebusiness.org. You can also find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you just search for my name, Tamzin Fox-Davies, I'm pretty much the only one of me. I'm at Tamzin FD on Twitter. And if you like pictures of plants and dogs, I'm on Instagram too for that.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Been really good to have a conversation.
Thank you.
And perhaps it'd be nice to pick up something a little bit deeper later on with a few of those topics. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. I've had a great time.
Brilliant. Thank you.